My name is Janet Rogers. I'm 31 years old, and while I was still reeling from my father's unexpected heart attack and struggling to process the devastating loss of the man who had been my closest family member and biggest supporter, I discovered that my Aunt Sandra had manipulated the life insurance beneficiary forms during his final medicated hospital stay to steal the $720,000 payout that was rightfully mine, then used every penny to fund her son Kevin's luxury car dealership while I couldn't even afford to pay Dad's funeral expenses. What she didn't know was that her heartless exploitation of a dying man's vulnerability and a grieving daughter's trust was about to trigger the most comprehensive federal investigation she could imagine, one that would cost her everything she thought she could steal from my father's final gift to me. The life insurance policy that would become the center of my family's betrayal had been something my father, Robert Rogers, and I had discussed many times over the years, as he meticulously planned his estate to ensure I would be financially secure after his death. As a single father who had raised me alone after my mother died when I was 8, Dad understood the importance of providing for my future even when he couldn't be there to support me personally. Janet, I want you to know that when I'm gone, this life insurance policy will give you the freedom to pursue your dreams without worrying about money, Dad had told me during one of our regular financial planning conversations just 6 months before his death. Whether you want to go back to school, start a business, or just take time to figure out your next chapter, this money will provide the security I've always wanted to give you. My father was a man who believed deeply in personal responsibility and careful planning. As a small business owner who had built a successful accounting practice from nothing, he understood both the importance of financial security and the value of having resources available during times of transition and uncertainty. The life insurance policy was his way of ensuring that his death wouldn't leave me struggling financially during what he knew would be the most difficult period of my life. I've made you the sole beneficiary because you're my only child and the most important person in my world, Dad had explained when we reviewed his estate planning documents. This money represents my life's work and my love for you. I want it to provide opportunities and security that honor the relationship we've built together. The $720,000 policy wasn't just a financial instrument. It was my father's final expression of love and his commitment to taking care of me even after his death. He had worked extra jobs and made sacrifices throughout my childhood to afford the premium payments, viewing the policy as one of the most important investments he could make in my future happiness and security. Our relationship had always been close, built on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of trust that develops between a single parent and an only child who have weathered life's challenges together. Dad had been not just my father, but also my confidant, advisor, and biggest cheerleader as I built my career as a paralegal and planned for my own future family and financial goals. You're going to do amazing things with your life, Janet, Dad would say during our weekly dinner conversations. And when I'm no longer here to help and encourage you, this insurance money will remind you that I'm still supporting your dreams and believing in your potential. The heart attack that took my father's life came without warning on a Tuesday evening in March, when he collapsed at his office while working late on a client's tax returns. At 58 years old, Dad had seemed healthy and energetic, with no history of heart problems and every expectation of living well into his 80s. The sudden loss was devastating beyond anything I could have imagined. Ms. Rogers, your father suffered a massive heart attack and is in critical condition, the emergency room doctor had told me when I arrived at the hospital. We've managed to stabilize him for now, but the damage to his heart is severe. The next 72 hours will be crucial for determining his prognosis. Those 72 hours were the longest of my life, as I sat beside Dad's hospital bed watching him drift in and out of consciousness, while connected to machines that were keeping him alive. He was heavily medicated for pain and had difficulty speaking clearly, but during his lucid moments, he expressed how proud he was of me and how much he loved me. Take care of yourself, sweetheart, Dad had whispered during one of our final conversations. Everything I've worked for is yours, and I want you to use it to build a beautiful life. Don't let anyone tell you what to do with the gifts I'm leaving you. Those words would become prophetic in ways neither of us could have anticipated, as family members who had barely been part of our lives began positioning themselves to claim the resources Dad had specifically designated for my security and future opportunities. My father died on Friday morning, surrounded by the love and grief of his only child, never knowing that his sister Sandra had been manipulating the situation to steal the inheritance he had worked his entire adult life to provide for me. The loss of Dad was devastating enough without the additional trauma of discovering that trusted family members had exploited his vulnerable state to commit fraud against his final wishes. "Janet, I'm so sorry for your loss," Sandra had said at the hospital immediately after Dad's death, her expression seeming genuinely grief-stricken and supportive. "Your father was a wonderful man, and I want you to know that I'm here to help you with whatever practical matters need to be handled during this difficult time." Sandra's offer of assistance seemed like a blessing during those early hours of grief. When I was struggling to process the reality of losing my father while also facing the overwhelming practical responsibilities of funeral planning, estate management, and the countless details that accompany someone's death. "I know Robert would want me to help you navigate the insurance claims and financial paperwork," Sandra continued, with what appeared to be genuine family concern. "He always worried about leaving you to handle these complicated matters alone, and I promised him I would make sure you weren't overwhelmed by legal and financial details while you're grieving. Have you ever been so devastated by loss that you gratefully accepted help from someone who was actually positioning themselves to exploit your vulnerability?" That's exactly what I experienced as Sandra offered assistance that seemed motivated by family loyalty, but was actually the beginning of her systematic theft of my father's life insurance money. The funeral arrangements consumed the next week of my life, as I struggled to honor Dad's memory while managing the financial stress of covering expenses that I had assumed would be easily handled once the life insurance claim was processed. Sandra continued to position herself as helpful and supportive, offering to handle insurance paperwork while I focused on grief and funeral planning. "Don't worry about the life insurance claim right now," Sandra assured me during the week between Dad's death and his funeral. "I've contacted the insurance company and started the paperwork process. They said it typically takes a few weeks to process claims, so you don't need to think about financial matters while you're dealing with everything else." I was grateful for Sandra's management of practical details that seemed overwhelming during my acute grief. The insurance claim felt like a distant concern compared to the immediate task of planning a funeral that would honor Dad's life and provide closure for the people who had loved and respected him. The funeral itself was a beautiful celebration of Dad's life, attended by clients, friends, and community members who had been touched by his generosity, integrity, and commitment to helping others achieve financial stability through his accounting practice. The outpouring of love and respect for my father was both comforting and overwhelming during the worst week of my life. "Your father helped our family through some very difficult financial times," one of his longtime clients told me after the service. "He was more than just an accountant. He was a trusted advisor who genuinely cared about his clients' success and security. You should be incredibly proud of the man he was and the legacy he's leaving behind." The legacy Dad was leaving behind included not just the love and respect of his community, but also the financial security he had carefully planned to provide for my future. The $720,000 life insurance policy was his final gift to me, representing decades of sacrifice and planning to ensure I would be able to pursue my dreams without financial stress. But as the weeks following Dad's funeral passed and I began to address practical matters like insurance claims and estate settlement, I started to discover that Sandra's helpful management of paperwork had involved changes and decisions that I had never authorized or even been informed about. "Janet, I need to talk to you about your father's life insurance policy." Sandra called me 3 weeks after the funeral, her voice carrying a tone that immediately made me uncomfortable. "There were some complications with the beneficiary information that I've been working to resolve with the insurance company." The mention of complications with beneficiary information was alarming, since I knew Dad had been meticulous about keeping his estate planning documents current and accurate. The life insurance policy had always listed me as the sole beneficiary, and there should have been no complications or confusion about the claim process. "What kind of complications?" I asked, feeling increasingly anxious about what Sandra might tell me. Dad was very careful about his estate planning, and I'm listed as the beneficiary on all his policies and accounts. Well, that's where things get complicated, Sandra replied with obvious discomfort. It turns out that Robert changed the beneficiary on his life insurance policy during his final hospital stay. He made me the primary beneficiary and asked me to use the money to help the whole family prosper rather than just giving it all to one person. The claim that Dad had changed his life insurance beneficiary while dying in the hospital, heavily medicated and barely conscious, was so shocking and inconsistent with everything I knew about his values and wishes that I couldn't initially process what Sandra was telling me. "That's impossible," I said, my voice shaking with disbelief and growing anger. Dad was heavily sedated and could barely speak during his final days. He wouldn't have made major financial decisions, and he certainly wouldn't have changed beneficiaries without discussing it with me first. "Janet, I know this is hard to accept, but your father was concerned about you handling such a large amount of money while you're grieving," Sandra replied with false sympathy that barely concealed her defensiveness. "He thought it would be better for the family if the insurance money was used for investments that would benefit everyone rather than just sitting in your account." Have you ever been told that your dying father had secretly changed his will to benefit someone else because he didn't trust you with your inheritance? That's exactly what I was hearing as Sandra tried to justify what I was beginning to understand was theft of my father's life insurance money. Sandra, Dad, and I discussed his life insurance policy many times, and he was very clear that he wanted me to be the sole beneficiary, I said, trying to control my emotions while processing the magnitude of what she was claiming. He would never have made such a major change without talking to me, especially while he was hospitalized and medicated. "I understand why you're upset, but I have the paperwork showing the beneficiary change," Sandra responded with increasing confidence. "Robert signed the forms in the hospital, and the insurance company has processed the claim accordingly. The money has already been distributed based on his final wishes." The revelation that the insurance money had already been distributed to Sandra rather than to me was devastating beyond anything I could have imagined. My father's final gift to me, the financial security he had worked his entire life to provide, had been stolen while I grieved his loss and trusted his sister to handle practical matters honestly. "Where is the money now?" I asked, dreading the answer, but needing to understand the full scope of what had been taken from me. "How has Dad's life insurance money been used?" What Sandra told me next would reveal that her theft of my inheritance wasn't just about claiming money that didn't belong to her. It was about using my father's death benefits to fund lifestyle improvements and business opportunities for her own family, while I struggled with grief and the financial stress of covering funeral expenses and Dad's medical bills. "I've invested the insurance money in a wonderful business opportunity for Kevin," Sandra announced, as if she was sharing good news rather than admitting to theft. "We used the funds to open a luxury car dealership that's going to provide excellent returns and create jobs in our community." The casual revelation that my father's $720,000 life insurance payout had been used to finance her son Kevin's business venture was so shocking that I couldn't immediately respond. My inheritance had been stolen to fund someone else's entrepreneurial dreams, while I faced financial hardship during the worst period of my life. Kevin has always been interested in the automotive industry, and this opportunity came up right when the insurance money became available, Sandra continued, apparently expecting me to be pleased about how my stolen inheritance was being used. "Your father would be so proud to see how his life insurance is creating opportunities for the next generation and contributing to family success." The twisted logic that my father would be proud of having his life insurance stolen to fund his nephew's business while his own daughter struggled financially was both personally offensive and revealing about Sandra's complete inability to understand the purpose and meaning of life insurance policies. "Sandra, that money was supposed to be mine," I said, my voice rising with anger and disbelief. "Dad specifically designated me as the beneficiary because he wanted to provide for my future, not fund Kevin's business ventures." "Janet, you're being selfish about this situation," Sandra replied with the same dismissive tone she had used to justify the theft. Your father's money is being used to create something positive and productive instead of just sitting in your account while you grieve. Kevin's dealership is going to employ people and contribute to the community economy. The characterization of my rightful inheritance as money that would just sit in my account while praising Kevin's business venture as positive and productive revealed everything I needed to know about Sandra's priorities and her complete lack of understanding about the ethical and legal violations involved in stealing life insurance money from the designated beneficiary. But what made the betrayal even more devastating was learning that my entire extended family had been involved in celebrating and supporting Kevin's business venture, treating my father's stolen life insurance money as a family investment rather than recognizing it as theft from a grieving daughter. We're having a grand opening celebration for Kevin's dealership next month, Sandra informed me with obvious excitement about the business funded by my stolen inheritance. The whole family is invited to celebrate his success and see how beautifully your father's insurance money has been invested in creating opportunities for everyone. The invitation to celebrate a business venture funded by my own stolen inheritance was so absurd and cruel that it perfectly captured Sandra's complete disconnection from reality and basic ethical boundaries regarding theft of designated life insurance benefits. As I hung up the phone that day, I realized that Sandra's theft wasn't just about money. It was about exploiting my grief and my father's vulnerable final days to claim resources that represented his love for me and his commitment to my future security. But while Sandra and Kevin celebrated their theft and planned grand opening festivities funded by my father's life insurance money, I was beginning to understand that their fraud involved federal crimes and that the beneficiary changes they claimed Dad had authorized would not withstand legal scrutiny from investigators who specialized in insurance fraud and elder abuse. The woman who had stolen my father's final gift while claiming to protect family interests was about to learn that insurance fraud carries consequences she had never imagined, and that my background as a paralegal had given me exactly the legal knowledge necessary to expose her crimes and recover every penny she had taken from my inheritance. The devastating scope of Sandra and Kevin's theft became increasingly clear as I began investigating the circumstances of the alleged beneficiary change and discovering the extent to which they had used my father's life insurance money to create a lifestyle and business venture that I could never have imagined they would fund through fraud against a grieving family member. Janet, you should see Kevin's dealership. It's absolutely incredible. My cousin Lisa called to share her excitement about the business funded by my stolen inheritance. He has a showroom full of luxury cars, a beautiful office space in the downtown district, an inventory worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sandra made such smart investment decisions with the insurance money. The enthusiasm about business amenities purchased with my father's death benefits was both personally devastating and legally significant, since it demonstrated my family's awareness that Kevin's dealership had been funded through Dad's life insurance policy, while they remained apparently oblivious to the fraud involved in redirecting those funds. The grand opening celebration is going to be amazing, Lisa continued, apparently expecting me to share her excitement about a business funded by my stolen inheritance. Kevin invited over 200 people, including community leaders, potential customers, and all the extended family. Everyone wants to see what he's accomplished with the family investment. The reference to family investment while describing a business funded entirely by my father's stolen life insurance money was both logically absurd and legally incriminating, since it revealed the family's understanding that the dealership had been purchased with Dad's death benefits. But what proved to be even more infuriating was learning that Kevin was presenting himself publicly as a self-made entrepreneur who had achieved success through hard work and family values, rather than acknowledging that his entire business had been funded through theft of life insurance money from a grieving family member. Kevin's been posting on social media about his entrepreneurial journey and the importance of family support in achieving business success, another cousin informed me during a conversation about the dealership. He's really inspiring other young people to pursue their dreams and work hard to achieve their goals. The narrative that Kevin was inspiring others through his entrepreneurial journey, while his business was actually funded by stolen life insurance money, was both psychologically manipulative and legally problematic, since it demonstrated his participation in creating false narratives about the source of his sudden business success. Have you ever watched someone build a public reputation as a successful entrepreneur using money they stole from your deceased parents' life insurance policy? That's exactly what I was experiencing as Kevin leveraged my father's stolen death benefits to create a false image of self-made business achievement. The social media posts that Kevin was creating to promote his dealership and build his entrepreneurial reputation were particularly offensive because they consistently emphasized themes of hard work, family values, and earned success, while completely concealing the fact that his business had been purchased with fraudulently obtained life insurance money. Grateful for the family support that made this dream possible, Kevin posted alongside photos of expensive car inventory and luxury dealership facilities. Success comes from surrounding yourself with people who believe in your vision and are willing to invest in your future. The reference to family support and people willing to invest, while showcasing assets purchased with my stolen inheritance, was both personally cruel and legally useful, since it provided evidence of Kevin's awareness that his business had been funded by family money rather than his own resources or legitimate investors. Opening a business requires sacrifice, planning, and the courage to pursue your dreams even when others doubt your abilities, Kevin posted in another social media update that positioned him as an inspirational figure rather than acknowledging the theft that had funded his success. The narrative about sacrifice and courage while building a business with someone else's stolen inheritance was so hypocritical and self-serving that it perfectly captured Kevin's willingness to exploit my father's death and my grief for his personal advancement and public image building. But while Kevin was building his fraudulent reputation as a successful entrepreneur and Sandra was celebrating her smart investment decisions, I was working with attorneys who specialized in insurance fraud and elder abuse to investigate the circumstances of the alleged beneficiary change that had enabled their theft. Ms. Rogers, the beneficiary change forms that your aunt submitted to the insurance company contain several red flags that suggest potential fraud, Attorney Michael Thompson explained during our initial consultation. The timing, circumstances, and your father's medical condition all raise serious questions about the validity of these documents. The legal framework for challenging Sandra's theft was more comprehensive than I had initially realized, with specific statutes designed to protect life insurance beneficiaries from family members who might exploit dying relatives' vulnerability to redirect death benefits for their own benefit. We need to obtain your father's complete medical records from his final hospitalization to establish his mental capacity and ability to make informed financial decisions during the period when these forms were allegedly signed, Michael continued, as we began building the case that would expose Sandra and Kevin's crimes. But what proved to be the most crucial aspect of the investigation was discovering that the beneficiary change forms contained signatures that forensic experts would be able to prove had been forged, since they were inconsistent with my father's documented handwriting during his final illness. Your father's medical records show that he was heavily sedated and experiencing cognitive impairment during the entire period when the beneficiary changes were supposedly made, Michael explained after reviewing hospital documentation. This medical evidence directly contradicts the insurance company's assumption that he was competent to make such significant financial decisions. The medical evidence that my father had lacked the mental capacity to authorize beneficiary changes during his final hospitalization was both personally validating and legally decisive, since it proved that Sandra's claimed authorization was fraudulent regardless of whether the signatures had been forged. We can pursue both criminal charges for insurance fraud and civil recovery for the full amount of your stolen inheritance plus damages, Michael continued as we prepared the comprehensive case that would expose Sandra and Kevin's theft while recovering every penny they had stolen from my father's final gift to me. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of building the legal case was learning that Sandra and Kevin's own public celebrations and social media posts about the dealership would provide perfect evidence of their crimes, and their complete lack of remorse for stealing from a grieving family member. Every social media post about Kevin's business success, every family celebration of the dealership, and every public statement about family investment and entrepreneurial achievement is evidence that will be used to prosecute their crimes, Michael explained as we documented their public enjoyment of stolen assets. The systematic documentation of their theft and their celebration of business success, funded by my father's life insurance money, was creating a comprehensive case that would be impossible for them to deny or minimize during prosecution. Ms. Rogers, we've reviewed all the evidence and are prepared to file federal charges against your aunt and cousin for insurance fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to defraud a beneficiary, Federal Prosecutor Sarah Chen informed me as the criminal case reached the filing stage. The federal government's interest in prosecuting Sandra and Kevin's crimes was both validating and empowering, confirming that their theft represented serious violations of laws designed to protect vulnerable dying patients and their designated beneficiaries from financial exploitation during medical crises. As Sandra continued planning Kevin's grand opening celebration, and my family prepared to toast his entrepreneurial success, funded by my stolen inheritance, they remained completely unaware that federal investigators were preparing arrest warrants and asset seizure orders that would destroy their party and expose the true criminal source of Kevin's business venture. The timing was perfect. The grand opening would provide the ideal setting for demonstrating the scope of their theft, while ensuring that hundreds of witnesses would observe their arrest and understand how Kevin's dealership had actually been financed through fraud against a grieving family member. The elaborate grand opening celebration that Sandra and Kevin organized to showcase the luxury car dealership was attended by over 200 people, including family members, community leaders, potential customers, and local business owners who had been invited to witness what they believed was an inspiring story of young entrepreneurial success, achieved through family support and hard work. "Welcome everyone to the grand opening of Kevin's Luxury Auto," Sandra announced to the assembled crowd as the celebration began. "Today we're celebrating not just a successful business launch, but also the power of family investment and smart financial planning to create opportunities that benefit our entire community." The speech about family investment and smart financial planning, while surrounded by expensive car inventory purchased with my father's stolen life insurance money, was both psychologically manipulative and legally incriminating, since it demonstrated Sandra's public acknowledgement that the dealership had been funded through family financial resources. The dealership itself was everything I could never have afforded to help someone start: a prime downtown location with floor-to-ceiling windows, luxury office spaces, and inventory worth over $500,000 that represented the financial security my father had worked his entire life to provide for my future. "Look at this incredible showroom," guests were saying as they toured the facility purchased with my father's death benefits. "Kevin has really created something special here." The family investment in his vision is obviously paying off already. The praise for the family investment, while admiring facilities purchased with stolen life insurance money, created exactly the kind of witness testimony that would be valuable during criminal prosecution, since it documented the public's understanding that the dealership had been funded through family financial support. But what made the celebration even more cruel and legally damaging was Kevin's acceptance speech, where he positioned himself as a self-made entrepreneur while crediting family support without acknowledging that his business had been funded entirely through theft of my father's death benefits. "I want to thank my family for believing in my vision and providing the support that made this dream possible," Kevin said to the applauding crowd. Success in business requires more than just hard work. It requires people who are willing to invest in your potential and help you achieve your goals. The characterization of theft as investment and fraud as support, while accepting praise for entrepreneurial success, demonstrated Kevin's complete willingness to build his reputation on lies while exploiting my father's death and my grief for personal advancement. "This dealership represents everything I've worked toward," Kevin continued in his speech. "Family values, community investment, and the belief that with dedication and support, anyone can achieve their dreams in America." Have you ever listened to someone accept praise for achieving their dreams using money they stole from your dead parents' life insurance policy? That's exactly what I was experiencing as Kevin positioned himself as an inspirational success story, while his entire business was funded by theft from my father's final gift to me. The social media documentation that was being created throughout the celebration provided comprehensive evidence of the scope and cost of assets purchased with my stolen inheritance. But more importantly, it demonstrated the public narrative that Sandra and Kevin were creating about the source of their sudden business success. Amazing grand opening celebration for Kevin's dealership. Family members were posting on Facebook with photos of expensive inventory and luxury facilities. So proud of his entrepreneurial spirit and grateful for the family support that made this incredible business possible. The social media posts linking the celebration to family support, while showcasing assets purchased with stolen life insurance money, provided perfect evidence of their consciousness of guilt and their public acknowledgement that the business had been funded through family financial resources. But while my family and their guests celebrated Kevin's fraudulent business success without any awareness of the criminal investigation heading their way, federal agents were finalizing arrest warrants and asset seizure orders that would end their celebration and begin their prosecution for insurance fraud and elder abuse. At exactly 7:30 p.m., when the grand opening celebration was at its peak and all 200 invited guests were present to witness the occasion, FBI Special Agent Patricia Davis and her team arrived with federal marshals and comprehensive search and seizure warrants that would end Kevin's party and begin his education about federal crimes involving life insurance theft. Sandra Rogers and Kevin Rogers, you are under arrest for insurance fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to defraud a beneficiary, and theft of protected death benefits, Agent Davis announced as she placed handcuffs on my aunt and cousin in front of their shocked celebration guests. The silence that followed their arrests was absolute and profound, as 200 people processed what they were witnessing. The family members whose smart investment they had been celebrating were being arrested for federal crimes involving theft of life insurance money from a grieving family member. The luxury car dealership being celebrated tonight was purchased through fraudulent theft of life insurance proceeds belonging to Janet Rogers, whose father died of a heart attack 3 months ago, Agent Davis announced to the stunned gathering of community leaders, customers, and family members. The comprehensive explanation of the crimes was being delivered to an audience that included all the people who had been praising Kevin's entrepreneurial success and Sandra's investment wisdom, while enjoying a celebration funded by my father's stolen death benefits. All vehicles, equipment, and business assets purchased with stolen life insurance money are being seized by the federal government for recovery and restitution to the legal beneficiary, another agent announced, as asset forfeiture specialists began documenting the expensive inventory and preparing seizure paperwork. The systematic seizure of stolen business assets was both thorough and satisfying, with federal agents cataloging every luxury vehicle, piece of office equipment, and facility improvement that had been purchased with my father's insurance money while I struggled with grief and funeral expenses. But the most meaningful moment came when I finally had the opportunity to address the assembled guests who had been celebrating a business venture funded by my father's stolen life insurance money, without understanding the criminal source of Kevin's sudden entrepreneurial success. 3 months ago, my father Robert Rogers died of a heart attack, leaving me a $720,000 life insurance policy that was supposed to help me survive the worst loss of my life. I announced to the stunned celebration guests, who were now learning the truth about how Kevin's dealership had been financed. The comprehensive explanation of my family's theft was being delivered to an audience that included many of the same community leaders and potential customers who had been praising Kevin's business acumen and family values throughout the evening. While I was drowning in grief and struggling to pay my father's funeral expenses, my Aunt Sandra forged beneficiary documents to steal his entire life insurance payout, then used every penny to fund this luxury car dealership, while claiming my dying father wanted the money used for family business investments. Every vehicle you've been admiring, every luxury facility you've been touring, and every aspect of Kevin's supposed entrepreneurial success was purchased with life insurance money that was stolen from a grieving daughter, while she struggled to honor her father's memory and pay his final expenses. The detailed accounting of how their celebration had been funded through life insurance theft was both personally cathartic and legally significant, providing public testimony about crimes that had enabled Kevin's false reputation as a successful young entrepreneur. As federal agents continued processing the scene and Sandra and Kevin were transported to federal custody, I realized that this moment represented not just justice for their theft, but also vindication of my father's memory and recovery of the financial security he had worked his entire life to provide for my future. The people who had stolen my father's life insurance money while claiming to honor his wishes were finally facing consequences that reflected the magnitude of their betrayal of his trust and their violation of federal laws protecting dying patients and grieving families from financial exploitation. The comprehensive legal and financial resolution that followed Sandra and Kevin's dramatic arrest at their stolen money dealership celebration moved through federal court with remarkable efficiency, driven by overwhelming evidence of their crimes and clear medical documentation, proving that my father had lacked the mental capacity to authorize the beneficiary changes that enabled their theft of his life insurance money. Sandra Rogers and Kevin Rogers ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple federal felony charges, including insurance fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to defraud a beneficiary, and theft of protected death benefits, receiving sentences of 6 and 4 years respectively in federal prison, plus comprehensive restitution requirements that would ensure I recovered not just my father's stolen insurance money, but also substantial additional damages. The defendants systematically exploited a dying man's vulnerability and medical incapacitation to forge beneficiary documents and steal life insurance proceeds, specifically designated for his grieving daughter, Federal Judge Michael Rodriguez said during their sentencing hearing. This case represents one of the most callous examples of elder abuse and insurance fraud this court has encountered, targeting both a vulnerable dying patient and his surviving family member during their most difficult time. The judicial condemnation was both personally validating and legally significant, establishing important precedent for protecting terminally ill patients from financial manipulation and ensuring that life insurance beneficiaries receive the death benefits that were specifically designated for their security and healing. But perhaps more importantly, the asset forfeiture and restitution process resulted in recovery of not just my father's original $720,000 life insurance payout, but an additional $400,000 in damages, penalties, and punitive awards that reflected the emotional trauma and financial hardship I had suffered during my grief process. Ms. Rogers, the Comprehensive Restitution Award ensures that you receive not just your father's stolen insurance money, but also compensation for the additional suffering and financial stress caused by your family's theft during your most vulnerable period, Civil Attorney Michael Thompson explained as we finalized the recovery process. The enhanced restitution meant that my father's life insurance money would ultimately provide even greater financial security than he had originally planned, creating resources that would honor his memory while supporting both my healing and my ability to pursue opportunities he had always encouraged me to explore. Using my father's recovered insurance money exactly as he had intended, I took extended time for grief counseling and healing, while also establishing the Robert Rogers Memorial Scholarship Fund, which provides educational support for children who have lost parents while also offering legal assistance to families whose life insurance benefits are threatened by elder abuse and beneficiary fraud. Janet's courage in prosecuting her own family members for stealing her father's life insurance money has inspired dozens of other fraud victims to come forward, Foundation Director Dr. Elizabeth Wilson said during our annual memorial dinner. Her case has created awareness and legal protections that will help prevent similar thefts from devastating other grieving families. The foundation had provided emergency assistance to over 120 families whose life insurance benefits had been threatened or stolen by relatives who exploited terminal illness and grief to commit fraud. while also helping secure criminal convictions against more than 20 family members who had engaged in similar elder abuse and insurance theft. But perhaps the most personally meaningful aspect of the resolution was the way my father's scholarship fund had created educational opportunities for young people facing their own family tragedies, transforming his insurance money into resources that would help other families build positive futures, despite devastating loss. Your father's scholarship helped me finish college after my mom died and my relatives tried to steal her insurance money, one recipient wrote to thank me. Having both financial support and legal protection meant I could focus on my education instead of fighting family members who wanted to exploit our tragedy. Your dad's memory is helping other kids succeed, even when they face terrible loss and family betrayal. The impact of my father's scholarship program on other families facing similar exploitation was both emotionally healing and spiritually meaningful, demonstrating that his insurance money was ultimately creating exactly the kind of positive legacy he would have wanted to leave behind. Have you ever been able to transform your parents' stolen death benefits into resources that helped dozens of other families survive similar exploitation? That's exactly what I experienced as Dad's recovered insurance money became the foundation for protecting other vulnerable patients and grieving families from relatives who would exploit terminal illness and death for personal financial gain. Your willingness to fight for your father's insurance money despite family pressure has changed how law enforcement and insurance companies handle beneficiary protection, Attorney Michael Thompson explained during our final case review. The legal precedent established by your prosecution has made it much easier to investigate and prosecute family members who exploit dying relatives. The legal changes that had emerged from Sandra and Kevin's prosecution were both personally satisfying and professionally important, creating stronger protections for terminally ill patients and clearer criminal penalties for relatives who exploit medical vulnerability to commit insurance fraud. But the most personally healing development was the way my pursuit of justice for Dad's stolen insurance money had connected me with other grieving family members who had faced similar exploitation, creating a community of support that understood both the trauma of losing parents and the additional devastation of family financial betrayal. I never knew that other families steal from dying relatives, one daughter told me during a support group meeting. Learning about your case gave me the courage to report my brother for forging my father's beneficiary forms, and now I've recovered the insurance money that was supposed to help me survive losing him. The ripple effect of education and legal action that had emerged from my family's crimes was both personally meaningful and professionally significant, demonstrating that one person's pursuit of justice could create awareness and protection for thousands of other potential victims of elder abuse and insurance fraud. 3 years after Sandra and Kevin's federal convictions for stealing my father's life insurance money, I was invited to deliver the keynote address at the National Conference on Elder Abuse Prevention, speaking to an audience of investigators, medical professionals, and victim advocates about protecting terminally ill patients from financial exploitation during their most vulnerable final days. My aunt and cousin stole my father's $720,000 life insurance payout by forging beneficiary documents while he was dying in the hospital, then used every penny to fund a luxury car dealership while I struggled to pay his funeral expenses, I told the audience of elder abuse prevention specialists. Their theft wasn't just insurance fraud, it was exploitation of a dying man's vulnerability and an assault on his final gift to his grieving daughter. The presentation was both educational and cathartic, allowing me to honor my father's memory while helping medical and legal professionals understand the unique vulnerability of terminally ill patients and the importance of strong protections against family financial manipulation during end-of-life care. As I concluded my keynote with a comprehensive tribute to my father's life and the positive legacy created by his Memorial Scholarship Fund, I realized that Sandra and Kevin's theft had ultimately led to outcomes that were more meaningful and impactful than simply maintaining private access to his insurance money. The stolen death benefits had been recovered with substantial enhancements. Their crimes had created stronger legal protections for other vulnerable patients and grieving families. and Dad's memory had been honored through educational opportunities that would help other young people succeed despite facing family tragedies and financial exploitation. Most importantly, I had learned that grief makes us vulnerable to exploitation. But love for our deceased parents can drive us to seek justice that honors their memory, while protecting other families from the kind of betrayal that could destroy their ability to survive loss and rebuild meaningful lives. If you're reading this and you're dealing with family members who are pressuring you about life insurance benefits or exploiting your grief to access death benefits during a loved one's final illness, please know that there are legal protections and advocacy resources available to help you defend your inheritance during your most vulnerable time. Sometimes the people who claim to be helping you manage practical matters during medical crises are actually positioning themselves to steal resources that were specifically intended to help you survive loss. But insurance fraud and elder abuse are serious federal crimes, and dying patients and their beneficiaries have the right to protection from relatives who would exploit terminal illness for personal financial gain. If this story resonated with your own experiences, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever faced family financial exploitation during a loved one's final illness or your own period of grief? How did you handle relatives who tried to manipulate dying family members or steal benefits intended for your survival? Your story might help someone else who's facing similar exploitation during their darkest moments. Thank you for joining me on this journey from devastating loss through family betrayal to ultimate justice and meaningful legacy creation. Remember that protecting your deceased loved one's final gifts to you is not just about money. It's about honoring their memory and ensuring that their last act of love serves its intended purpose of helping you heal and rebuild after loss. See you in our next story here at Her Sweet Revenge.